Yes, very important. We'll have to wait and see what comes on the 24th of February, this Friday, whether or not South Africa will be grey-listed. But let's get further reaction to the budget speech. We are joined by Steve Swart from the ACDP. Thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it. Your overall views to the budget speech. I think public debt is a massive challenge, but it ties in with the decision to take on 2/3 of Eskom's debt.
No, absolutely. That is the ACDP's biggest concern. We've said it over the years, the escalating public debt and debt service costs. Over 3 years, we're going to see the debt escalating from about 4.6 trillion rand to 5.4 trillion rand. So it's an additional trillion rand. That's 1,000 billion rand. And the debt service costs are going to average between 366 to 400 billion rand per year. Now that crowds out much needed expenditure on health, on education and on policing. However, we also see extra funds going to Eskom. A lot of their debt has been taken over, and that has caused this escalation in the public debt. Now, what was supposed to be a debt stability is now being pushed out 3 years, and it's going to reach 73% of GDP, where it was going to be earlier, and it was only going to be 70% of GDP. So we've got to watch that very closely. People speak about a fiscal cliff. Once you go over that, it's hard to return. However, of course, the positive side of things is that there's an extra 100 billion rand tax collection as opposed to what was projected last year. As I said to the Commissioner now, thank you and well done in that regard, but we've got to make sure government spends that additional money correctly. Part of that must go to reduce our debt levels and, of course, to address the social need of our people. When you look at the social grants, I don't think the increases are sufficient to meet the increases in cost of living. When you consider increases in interest rates, fuel rates, but there is no increase in the personal taxes, and that is to be welcomed. On the other side of things, we do have a concern about the escalating public sector wage bill. Now, at this stage, we don't know what it's going to be. It was penciled in at 3%. Today, the minister said there's no figure on the table. And we know that inflation rate is far higher than 3%, and we know the trade unions are not going to accept 3%. So that variable must also be put into the equation. From the ACDP side, we'll be closely monitoring the budget, serving on the Finance Committee, but we also welcome additional funds for the policing, because I've always said, as a long-standing member of the Justice Committee, that if we give more funds to the Investigative Directorate, the SIU and the tribunals and the courts, we can collect billions of rands. Besides putting the syndicates away, locking them away, let's collect those billions of rands that have been stolen, and that will help balance the budget.
Yeah, I just quickly want to ask you in terms of an additional 1 billion rand being allocated to our national carrier, SAA. Many are saying, why is this even happening, given a strategic equity partner was decided on last year sometime? And what's interesting is that in the budget, an additional funding can be given to SAA, according to the finance minister, if they stick to strict conditions. Why are we still giving SAA money when there's a strategic equity partner?
No, absolutely. That's a massive concern, because we see that SAA over the years was looted and corrupted, and there's hardly anything left of it, very few aircraft that are still flying. The question is, why wasn't it just closed down totally? Because now we're seeing, now there's an additional billion rand, next year it could be another billion rand, and then we're back into square one. I thought the whole idea was that there wouldn't be any more bailouts to SAA. And that is a massive concern, because a billion rand is a lot of money and it can be used elsewhere. And that too is a concern, just as much as there's a concern now for the bailouts for other SOEs. We've got to look at the management, we've got to look at the governance of these SOEs, and whether we shouldn't, as you've correctly said, have more equity partners involved. Bring in the private sector and let's take hands together, because we cannot every single year have these bailouts. It's unsustainable and placing too much pressure on the sovereign debt levels.
Certainly. Thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it. That is Steve Swart from the ACDP. And it's going to be interesting to see how all this money is eventually allocated, especially when you look at the budget speech and it doesn't really speak about any funding further allocated to, for example, Transnet, that is in complete distress at this stage.